All right, so here we got our practice quiz for tomorrow, and I'm going to show you how to do this problem here and this problem here. So let's get started. So here is the first thing you should do is write down the expression. You're going to go to your table, and you're going to substitute the first number in the table, which is -2. And you can see here, everywhere there is an A, I replace the A with a -2. So that's your first step, is to substitute your numbers. So you can see here we had 3 A's, and I substituted those 3 A's with -2. And again, this number comes from the table. Once we have our substitution in place, we are going to do the order of operations. Don't forget order of operations, parentheses first, exponent second, multiply and divide is third, and you do that from left to right order, and adding and subtracting is the fourth step from left to right order as well. Anytime I'm dealing with a fraction like this where I have an expression in the top and the bottom, I recommend just simplifying the top one using order of operations and also simplifying the bottom one using the order of operations. So almost like they're two different problems. And anytime I look at my problems, I say, okay, what do I have here? I have subtraction. This is an exponent. This right here, even though it doesn't say it, means multiplication. So a number next to a letter means you have to multiply those two together. So this is multiplication and addition. So out of exponents, subtraction, multiplication, and addition, exponents is the first thing you're supposed to simplify according to the order of operations. And you can see here, -2 squared. Don't forget, that means the exponent tells you how many of these we have multiplied together. So I have -2 times -2. So 2 of these -2's multiplied together. So that gives me +4 here. I copy the rest the same way. And on the bottom, if I apply order of operations here, again, treat it like a separate problem, all we have to do here is multiply, and that's going to give me +4. And then just continue repeating. So I have subtraction, multiplication, addition. So order of operations says to do multiplication before addition and subtraction. So I'm going to simplify this part in the middle here. So here's the part you got to be very careful. Anytime you're dealing with negatives, it can get very confusing. So be very careful. So look, I'm going to put 4 minus, and I highlighted, I'm multiplying 7 times -2. 7 times -2 is -14. So I'm just going to put the negative a little bit higher to show that that's not the same value or the same sign as this one. So that's separate from this answer to this. Then I bring down my +2, and the denominator stays the same because there's nothing else to do there. And then the next step, I have subtraction and addition. I'm going to simplify from left to right. So that means I'm going to do this part here first because it appears first. 4 minus -14 is going to give me +18. Bring down my +2 and my 4. Then I'm going to get 18 plus 2 is 20 because that's the last thing to do up top. And then 20 divided by 4 is +5. That's my final answer. So now you go back to your table. When we evaluated -2, the answer we got was +5. And then now you're just going to repeat the same steps for the remainder of the numbers in the table. And then we're going to get to this one next. Same process. Next, I replace my 0 because, again, 0 is my next number. Replace all the variables with 0. And I like using 0 when I have to evaluate it because a lot of stuff cancels out immediately. So following the order of operations, again, you can see here we're going to do the exponents first. 0 squared just means 0 times 0. And that's going to give me 0 here minus 7 times 0 plus 2. And in my denominator, if I multiply this out, I'm going to get 0. Next, I have subtraction, multiplication, addition, so I got to do the middle, multiply this out. So 0 minus 0 plus 2. My denominator is still 0, and I get 0 minus 0, which will be 0 plus 2 over 0. And I add this up, I get 2 over 0. And here's one thing with this problem. I could have stopped it before, but I just wanted to show you the order of operations. But my denominator, if your denominator ends up being 0, your answer is going to be undefined, because you cannot divide by 0. We get too large of a number, so this is going to be called undefined as your actual answer. So when I evaluate 0, my answer was undefined, and that's what you would put for your answer. All right, so now we're going to evaluate when A is 2. So I'm going to walk you through these because I already completed it. Substitute your 2 in place of all the A's, so there's only 3 substitutions. And notice I didn't put any parentheses around this one because it's not a negative number, so I don't have to worry much when it's a negative. So here, I'm going to do exponents first, so I get 4. I copy the rest. And on the bottom, I just multiplied it out, and I got -4. And then in this step, you can see here, I simplified the middle because I have to multiply first according to order of operations. So that's 14. And then we're going to simplify from left to right for the top. So 4 minus 14, -10. And -10 plus 2, I get -8. And then the last step is just divide up the answer, and you get +2 in this case. And next, let's check when A is -3. So same thing, substitute your A's with your value, -3. And then you can see here, order of operations, you got to do exponents first. So I get 9. I copy the rest as is. On the bottom, I multiply this out. I got 6. Then you can see my next step, I ended up multiplying these out because you multiply first. So I get 7 times negative 3 is negative 21. So I just want to point out that I put the minus sign, and 7 times negative 3 is negative 21. So be careful, because this is an area you might mess up on, is that negative. So be very careful in this spot right here. Then you simplify from left to right, because all we have left is step 4, which is adding and subtracting. So 9 minus negative 21 is 30. 30 plus 2, I get 32. And when you divide this out in the calculator, you're going to get 5.33333. It keeps repeating. So put a little bar above here to show that it repeats. All right, and then the last number is 5 that we have to evaluate. So you can see here, I substituted in the first step. Exponents are first in this case, so 25. Copy the rest as is, and I multiply the bottom together, and I give you negative 10. Because again, we're treating both of these like separate problems. So apply the order of operations up top and apply the order of operations on the bottom separately. And now next, you can see I multiplied in the next step because you multiply first before adding and subtracting. Next step, subtract these two. We get negative 10 plus 2. Negative 10 plus 2 is negative 8. And then when you divide this out in the very end, you're going to get 0.8, positive 0.8. So now you can see here, I evaluated all the numbers in the table, and these are all the answers that I got. And of course, make sure you show your work to support your answers. All right, and then here's problem number 2, second table. Notice our expression is negative x squared. So I recommend expanding it out before you actually try to evaluate your numbers. So here, negative x squared means we have, remember, x squared means x times x. So this part right here means x times x. So I'm highlighting it so you can see that if you expand x squared, you get this. Notice we have a negative sign out front, so we have to put that negative there. So negative x squared translates to negative x times x when you expand it. And now that we have this complete, all we have to do is start substituting each of these numbers so we can evaluate it in the expression. And since my first number is negative, I recommend putting it in parentheses when you substitute negative numbers. It'll help you avoid mistakes, especially when you're dealing with other negatives in the problem. But when you multiply this out, negative 2 times negative 2, that's going to give me positive 4. And then don't forget we had that negative out here. And here's a little side note. Notice we had 3 negatives in here. When you multiply 3 negatives together, you get a negative answer. If you look at this pattern, a negative times a negative is positive. The moment I have negative times negative times negative, it's going to be a negative. Here, negative times negative times negative times negative is positive. And notice I have 4 negatives here, came out to be a positive. Here, I have 5 negatives multiplied together is a negative. 6 negatives multiplied together is positive. So the pattern is this. When you have an even amount, so notice we have 2 negatives here, your answer is positive. Here, we have 3 negatives, your answer is negative. The next one, we have 4 negatives, your answer was positive. Here we have 5 negatives, the answer is negative. And here we have 6 negatives, the answer is positive. So your answer will be positive anytime you have an even number of negative signs. So if you have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 negatives, your answer is going to be positive. If you have an odd amount of negatives, so 3 negatives multiplied together, 5 negatives multiplied together, 7, 9, 11, your answer will always be negative. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you get confused as to what your answer should be in terms of positive or negative. So again, since I have an odd number, 1, 2, 3, my answer will be negative. So you can see here when I evaluate negative 2, my answer is negative 4. And now we're evaluating 0, which is my favorite number because when you multiply this out, you can see here, your final answer will be 0. So that's the fastest number you could evaluate is 0. So that is the answer for that one. Next, when x is 2, you can see here we're going to get 2 times 2. I have 1 negative. So when you multiply this out, you're going to get negative 4 as your final answer. So I'll put negative 4 for that one there. Next, we evaluate when x is negative 3. And again, when I put negative numbers in there, I like to put parentheses because it helps you avoid the mistake of including that as your negative for the number. So it's a negative, and then whatever x is, negative 3, negative 3. Notice we have 3 negatives multiplied together. That's an odd amount. So when you multiply an odd amount of negatives, your answer will be negative. And then 3 times 3 is 9. So negative 9 is my answer when I evaluate negative 3, negative 9, and I put that in the table. And then now I substitute my 5 in here. So notice here I didn't have to put parentheses because it's a positive number. So I have negative 5 times 5. You get negative 25. So my answer for this will be negative 25. So remember, for these, just be very careful with the negatives. Anytime you have negatives involved, whether you're evaluating a negative number or you have negatives in the expression, be very careful. Spend extra close detail or attention to when you're doing the steps. And then the last thing to point out is that if your answer does come out wrong, make sure you look for the negatives, because that's usually where the mistake is going to be 99% of the time.